Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace, another creator-owned spotlight today, talking about a book that came out with Ablaze. It has a hardcover coming out on Kickstarter. You're going to want to read it. It's my pleasure to welcome the writer of that story, Traveling to Mars, Mark Russell, back to the show. Mark, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jace.
Yeah, so I'm so excited to talk to you about this. You said the last time you were on our show that it was maybe the best thing you ever wrote. Obviously, your opinion. I don't know that I can disagree. Now that it's kind of all been said and done, it's been out there in terms of the single issues. Agree, disagree? Have your thoughts changed? Feedback from fans? Where do you stand on it now?
I totally still think it's, if not the best, one of the very best, like a top three thing I've ever written. I couldn't could not be prouder of it.
Yeah, and I can see why. And we're gonna get into it, everybody. Now, if you're familiar with Mark's work, you know I'm a huge fan. I love it. Satire. We're gonna even talk a little bit about what satire means because I think specifically as it applies to this story is really interesting. But we're not gonna get too deep into it because we don't want to spoil. We want you to enjoy it for yourself. So let's start off with the elevator pitch, Mark. How would you describe this book to a potential reader?
I would say it's a if I'm going to describe this to a potential reader, I'm probably not going to sell them on it because it really is sort of a man's meditation on his regrets and all the things he did wrong, and also the great loves of his life that he lost on his way to Mars to die. So the basic premise, which is a terrible elevator pitch, by the way, don't never use that if you're trying to sell a story to Hollywood. But it tells a story about the first man to set foot on Mars, and the reason why he's chosen is because he's terminally ill. So they know they don't have to buy him a two-way ticket. They can just send him to Mars, leave him there. He's happy to claim all the material wealth of Mars for this company he's working for, and then he's just going to die there. And most of the story takes place on the way over to Mars. When the ship is launched, it's heading towards Mars. There's no turning back, and he's thinking about all the mistakes he's made on Earth, or the things he wish he'd done differently, and also the good memories he has about how it's all kind of coming to nothing now that he's going to die on this distant planet. But in a way, he begins to find meaning in that. He begins to find meaning in the fact that he's going to die alone on this distant world. And I don't want to get too much into how he does that because that's where we get into spoilers. But I feel like in a lot of ways, I think it's maybe the best thing I've ever written because it's the most raw and sincere and the least beholden to the conventions of comics, where you have to have like a meaningful, you have to have a good stopping point every 20 pages, or there has to be, a fight every issue. This one is really just more of an emotional story about a man's meditations about what it all means now that he's facing the end of his life, and also while the human race is sort of facing its end as well.
Yeah, it's kind of the clock is winding down on humanity, and maybe this guy is the Earth's last hope. And I agree with everything you just said. It's so emotional, it's so grounded, it's so relatable. And it's one of the things I was really excited to talk to you about, right? Like, so I want everybody, if you're not familiar, like that word satire gets kind of thrown around. What does it mean? And certainly you're writing, Mark, people use that word to describe it a lot. The technical definition is to use humor and irony and exaggeration to kind of poke fun, expose, criticize people or society or a culture, their failings, their ignorance, their stupidity, the stupid choices they make. So often in that, I hate to use this word, but there can be like a bite to it, right? Or a meanness. So you're pointing out, you're making fun of, and what have you. Um, and that's kind of what satire is. And we, people that write satire, they're often including themselves, right? They're part of the society they're making fun of. You have managed to do that with this. It's still a criticism, but then there's a belonging. There's the other half of it. It's almost anti-satire. There's a belong. We're all going to die. It's so relatable. We all have regrets. And that's why I think you're right. It should be in that top three because you've created this emotional story and this balance. And you're hearing Mark describing, you're like, oh, I don't want to read that. It sounds so sad. And what you've managed to make it kind of uplifting. It was amazing. Was that like purposeful? How challenging was that? Was it serendipitous? Give us the kind of the thought process behind the curtain.
Well, I first just want to say a couple words about the art of satire. And the thing I usually find kind of lacking about pure satires is that, yeah, you might have done an amazing job of critiquing this thing, but what next? What do we have then? If there's all these foundational flaws in this thing you've been talking about, which you might very well be right about, what should we be clinging to instead? And that's really what I tried to write with this book. It's like not just a satire in all the ways we try to fill the void with possessions and money and fail, but it also, I think, is more about what you can cling to that gives you lasting meaning and about how we really are above and beyond everything else and have always been more than anything a survival network for other human beings. And that is really where we find meaning, not so much in our status or in our acquisitions or in how people think of us when we die, how fondly we're remembered, but the whole sort of constellation of the lives we've affected. And we may not even be aware of the entire impact we've had, but really that is what gives us resonance. That's what makes us part of this great undulating river we call humanity.
Yeah, again, you're dead on, and I think an inspired choice to choose this. So this guy, not a spoiler, but it's right there in the back of the book. But this guy that is going, he's sort of he's an everyman. He's a manager of a pet store. Of all things, he's not some great big philosopher or thinker or what have you. But one of the things that struck me, and I think this is true of anybody that would be in that position, as he's traveling, he's very sort of self-aware and introspective, which is to say that we all have our own story. We're all interesting as human beings. So, was it purposeful for you to choose somebody who was kind of that everyman and be able to show that, even somebody who doesn't even think that highly of themselves, they can be extraordinary?
Yeah, and I think that part of it is that a philosopher is not somebody who studied philosophy or who, is qualified to speak about philosophy. A philosopher is anyone really who thinks about things beyond their immediate survival, who thinks about the nature of life and what it means in the universe and about what they should be doing, not just what they are doing. And that's kind of the perspective, the advantage of knowing that your life is coming to an end is you gain that perspective and say, well, what was it I should have been doing this whole time? Or what can I take away from this now that it's over? And so he does become very philosophical, but it's not that he's this great philosopher, as you say. It's because he's finally given the chance in life to to not have to be working and scrapping for money, and he's given the chance to sort of think philosophically. And that's kind of the point I was want to make, is that we all need to find this meaning for ourselves, and we need to take the time to think about it. It's not that we are any one of us are. It's not really a question of how smart or how much you know about philosophy. It's more a question about how interested you are in the problem.
Right, right. And to be able to look at it objectively, which again, when you
Right.
have bills to pay and you got kids to feed and job to go to and whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of noise. That's kind of the advantage Roy has. He's out there in space. He kind of
I,
knows the end is coming.
I
Uh,
read recently that most mammals, they sleep for 16 hours a day and then they're awake for 8 hours a day because that's as much time as they need to hunt and gather and mate. And then the other 16 hours, it's an evolutionary disadvantage for them to not be using energy
mhm.
and resources, just be resting the rest of that time. Humans is exactly the opposite. We're asleep for 8 hours a day and are awake for 16 hours a day, which from an evolutionary perspective seems incredibly like a bad decision. It
Right.
seems incredibly luxurious to give yourself 16 hours of waking time because you're spending energy all that time you're awake. But the reason why they think that humans evolved to be awake 16 hours is because it gave us such an evolutionary advantage to have that extra 8 hours of talking to people around the campfire, telling stories. And even at night when there's nothing really we can do to further our own survival by hunting or gathering, it was worth it enough just to be able to look at the stars and think about what was up there and how our place underneath the stars, that we evolved to be awake during spend half our life kind of nighttime hours.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Reminds me of a conversation I had recently with my wife though, because she came across something similar talking about dogs. And she's like, I want the life. We have three dogs. She's like, I want the life of our dogs. They sleep all 12, 14 hours a day.
Yeah, sounds nice.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, well, we've talked about Roy. We've talked about a little bit about satire and this journey that he's on. Um, oftentimes I like to hear about the impetus of the project and how you came up with this idea because again, it's such a fascinating one. And I think one we can all relate to. But specifically, what I'm curious about, because you mentioned kind of the freedom this project gave you, different from the typical tropes of comic action and cliffhangers at the end and what have you. Did you conceive it as like a kind of a complete story? Did it kind of change organically, like in terms of pacing and what the ending was? Give us a little background on that.
Yeah, everything changes once the writing actually starts. It's like the old Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
And writing is sort of getting punched in the face. It's like, yeah, I was writing and I had this blueprint of where the story was going to go and where every beat was going to be. But then when you're actually in the weeds, when you're doing the actual writing, you come up with better ideas or you realize that this is not really what you care about. It's sort of like a Ouija board where you're in contact with your own spirit. So you got to let the spirit sort of move the needle for you if you're going to write something really good, I think. Otherwise, you're forcing yourself to stick to the plan and it's going to feel, I don't know, mercenary. It's going to feel like probably a little not as deeply connected to what it is you actually have to say as if you were allowing yourself to change as you're writing it. But yeah, I had a very clear idea. I knew basically how it was going to end, but you really want to leave yourself a lot of room to maneuver and change as you go because that's I think where most of the good stuff is.
Yeah, and is that more true of something like this, where it's a little more emotional rather than, if you're like if you're ready to say a big superhero crossover, you got to hit certain goalposts, right? Or certain
Oh,
signposts on the road. This not the case.
yeah, well, especially in a story that's as much about memories and like recollections and a guy's internal thoughts that aren't really so much story as just sort of this guy's narrative of what the story means.
Hmm.
You got to leave yourself a lot of freedom to like expand on those things. So most of that stuff was kind of made up on the way because I'm trying to write through the eyes of somebody who has a lot of free time on their hands. It's not necessarily all events and plot. And so I have to think about what it is that would be meaningful to me or what I would want to talk about if I were in his situation. But to me, that was like really kind of what I enjoyed about the process on this. It was so introspective.
Yeah, and again, I think especially when it comes to relationships and the choices we make when we're young and don't know any better, high school formative years. Again, I think it's something that's going to be really relatable. And if you're watching this on YouTube, everybody, like perfect project for my typical background with this Starfield, because I want to talk a little bit about the art from Roberto Melli. He does such a fantastic job. When we have scenes in space, the vastness of it, Roy even talks about that at times, kind of exacerbates the loneliness and what have you. But he does such a fantastic job of giving us that feeling at times. But then again, it's a very emotional story. So the facial expressions, the flashbacks, the interactions, the body language of the character, he just did such a fantastic job. Was there any back and forth with the art, or was it just given the script and he kind of had a sense of what he needed to do? Give us some idea on the collaboration.
There was a lot of back and forth, more than I usually have, because I think Roberto was so devoted to making this right,
Mm.
to doing as good a job as he could on this. I feel like it was as much a project of love for him as it was for me. And I was treating it the same way, where I was just pouring everything I possibly could into this book, uh, which was nice to see. And yeah, so we had a lot of back and forth on what the characters should look like, how they should evolve in their look, and also just about like the general emotional states of the characters. And I think this is one of the reasons why we chose Roberto to do the art, because he does a good job of handling sort of subtle emotional states in a story which is mostly about a guy, writing in his diary.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the other thing about it. I never once, and this isn't always the case, but I never once, you could in a way a talking head book, right? When it's just people talking and how do you keep it visually interesting. There was never a time where I wasn't pulled in by the art. I wasn't pulled in by the story. I didn't, it's a compelling story in that way, which is very challenging to do when, yeah, this isn't, Star Wars. Even though he's in space, there's
Yeah.
lasers
Well,
and other spaceships and what have you.
in a way, the fact that it was sort of a talking head book made it, I think, more visually interesting because it's not like every panel is just this guy thinking or talking or writing his diary. It allows Roberto to go to the things that he's writing about.
Hmm.
So you see, he's talking about like how the Roman Empire collapsed and for 40 years, no one realized it was gone. So you can actually show these scenes from the Roman Empire. So you never know from page to page where the artwork is going to tell you. You could be in the future. You could be in the past. There could be aliens landing on Earth. There could, you could be in ancient Rome. And I think that's one of the advantages of writing a book like about it. It's about such how expansive not only the universe is, but the galaxy within our minds, where, how rich and full of possibilities that is as well.
Yeah, that's specifically mentioned and again, fascinating facts. And also, there's I'm not going to spoil everybody, but I'll just say some research you can do, some reading you can do about a fish later on that you find out is actually kind of a real thing, which was
That right. That was a true story. In fact, the whole reason why the story's set in Eufaula, or at least his origin is set in Eufaula, Alabama, is because that was where the actual Big Bad Leroy Brown, the world's smartest catfish, was from. So I
yeah.
figured I would add that sort of verisimilitude to the story.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. But again, it just goes to show that I mean, it doesn't feel like, like you said, like it's something fake. But again, it just goes to show that we've all got our thing, right? We're all, like I said earlier, we're all interesting in our own right. We've all kind of got our own story. Well, I want to ask you a little bit because this was released by Ablaze as single issues. I want to kind of ask you about what fan reaction. You have a pretty loyal fan base that likes to read your style of writing and read what you do. What was the fan reaction? How rewarding was it for you? Because people really did seem to get it from what I was seeing.
Yeah, no, it was very gratifying because people really seemed to embrace it the way I'd hope they would. They really just sort of read it and allowed themselves to sort of not just read it, but also sort of feel it. And I've had a lot of people talk to me at signings or at convention stuff saying that this is the one that really sort of changed their lives. And I'm not saying that to be grandiose, but to me, this is what we do when we write, right? We try to find the shortest distance between ourselves and another human soul. And
Hmm.
I feel like this is, it's enormously gratifying. It's the best sort of compliment you can get as a writer when someone tells you that you succeeded. And I think because so much of it is about these universal themes that we all have to deal with, mortality and the struggle for meaning in our lives, knowing that there's a time limit and it's quickly approaching, and also about how we try to like not be consumed by the need to make money, the need to acquire things that we not only require for our survival, but that society tells us we need to do for us to be valued. And how do we put that aside and find value in the things that really matter to us?
Yeah, again, kind of the central theme, right? The connectivity of all of us, because it really is a miracle that we even exist. The book kind of touches on that as well, because yeah, you can get caught up in that. You can get caught up in the pursuit of material things, or you can just get caught up in the kind of the thinking of our own mortality, be paralyzed by the fact that the end is, you're so focused on the end's going to come that you don't bother to enjoy the moment, right? It's like that. I think it was a Far Side cartoon or where way back, caveman times, there was already a guy holding a sign, the end is near, right? You're always so focused on the end that you don't
Right.
pay any attention to the present.
Well, the end is always near. I mean, for someone,
Right. Right.
but the solace is that the beginning is also near for someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way to put it. The other thing I think, and let me know if you've heard this from any of your fans or readers. The other thing I think this is a book that inherently, like, as soon as I finish reading it, like I want to share this with somebody else. Like this is a book that it needs to be out there. And man, I'm like, can't wait to tell and recommend it and get a few copies to hand out to people and what have you. Have you heard that from readers that it's a book that they really wanted or have shared with friends and other readers?
Yeah, I have heard that, but I think it'll be a lot easier once there's an actual book because people, I think, are more likely to take like a people, especially people who don't aren't traditionally comics readers,
Hmm.
are more likely to read it if you hand them an actual book
Right.
than if you hand them some floppies. Because I think people still have this association. If you hand somebody a floppy comic with, well, like, this is like a Mighty Mouse comic that I read when I was 6, or this is like, something like that. They don't take it as seriously. But if you hand them a book, even if it's, a graphic novel, I think it has more legitimacy. Plus, I think people, that's sort of the ideal way for the story to be read, I think.
Hmm.
It's just like you can read as much or as little as you want. You read until you feel like you've had enough for one sitting, and then you go and think about it. And I feel like that's the way the ideal way for the story to be read.
Yeah, I would agree. So, everybody, we are recording this before the Kickstarter campaign goes live. So, I will remind everybody, though, by the time this comes out, the campaign will go live. You can go click the link in the show notes and go and check it out. And the other thing, like maybe you said this sounds super interesting to you, but we know times are tough and maybe you just don't have the means right now, as much as you would like to join the campaign and check out this book. The other way you can help out Mark and Roberto is just share it on social media, right? Get it in front of as many eyes as possible. Because again, it came out from a smaller publisher. Not everybody knows that this book exists. So put it out there in social media. Let your local comic shop know. Let your friends know, so we can get this in front of as many eyes as possible, and people can get a chance to check it out. That being said, Mark, even though the campaign is not live, do you have an idea of what some of the tiers? Obviously, you can get the book. Do you know of any of the other rewards that are going to be available?
Yeah, there is original artwork by Roberto, which is to me the best sort of reward. And then there's also in a lesser tier, original artwork by myself, where I drew Roy and Leopold, one of the rovers. And yeah, there's just all kinds of really cool stuff on there. So I think, even if you're not sold on the book or you're not sure about it, just the rewards I think would be enough to, if you, assuming you've got the means to take a chance on one of these reward tiers.
Yeah, again, I think super worth your time, everybody. In terms of somebody who maybe collected the single issues, is there going to be a bunch of bonus material? Is there any like essays or process sketches or what have you? Any bonus material in the trade?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of bonus material, including, script pages and artwork by, like process artwork by Roberto. But to me, the real selling point is that it's going to be this hardcover, because this is the thing that always sort of gets me about, and I feel like it's one of the reasons why comics still aren't really taken as seriously as, say, literary fiction,
Hmm.
even though I think the writing and I think it's just as good of a reading experience most of the time, is because the industry itself doesn't really take it very seriously. They
Right.
put everything out in these very perishable
Hmm.
trade paperback formats, which I like. It's good to have a cheap paperback option, but the default should be a nice hardcover that's going to look good on somebody's shelf, that they're going to like actually, it says to me that when they publish a hardcover that we think this is going to stand the test of time. We think this is a book that people are going to want to keep on their shelves for, decades, and maybe give to someone else at some point as a gift. And that's exactly the way I would want Traveling to Mars to be treated. So I'm
Yeah.
glad it's getting a hardcover edition.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I'm also really happy to hear there's one of my favorite things to do is to read the script and then look at what actually made it, to the page. We'll see kind of that back and forth where you describe the panel, what Roberto brought to it and that kind of thing. That's my kind of favorite thing because it really shows that more than any other medium, this is such a collaborative process. Without you, there is no traveling to Mars. But without Roberto, there is no traveling to Mars. Like it really is kind of this
Yeah,
50-50.
yeah. There's really no one. No one's expendable. No one. There's really no sort of like guy shouting "stroke, stroke" with the
Yeah.
megaphone. It's all everyone's there because they have a vital role to play in the process. And yeah, I think you're right. Being able to see the script and see the artwork side by side gives you sort of an idea of how the role that each player on the team has.
Yeah, I always just find that I get even more out of it. The context or what have you. Maybe things I didn't catch that I didn't see in the artwork, and then they're there in the script. Oh yeah, I see how it all played. I just love that. So we're looking around an early October release once the campaign is done. That's what I've heard. Is
For
that
the yeah, and I think I don't want to screw this up and get it wrong, but yeah, I think that's when I think the trade comes out before then, but the hardcover it comes out with the completion of, it'll ship like in October.
great? So in time for Christmas, everybody. Again, I think it would make a fantastic gift. It's an incredible story. I could not recommend it more highly. It's just absolutely amazing. I'm definitely going to be getting myself one of those hardcovers. Well, Mark, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I always love chatting comics with you and themes and stories. And as always, we're winding down here. What's next? What else do you have coming down the line? What can you tease?
Oh, I got some things I'm very proud of. I mean, other than Batman Dark Age, which I'm doing with Mike and Laura Allred, which I love. There's also I'm doing a series with Mad Cave that's like a sci-fi anthology series that I've always wanted to write a sci-fi anthology series, sort of like an existentialist Twilight Zone, and we're calling it Vanishing Point. And
Nice.
so I really hope, and this is sort of a scoop because I don't think it's been announced yet. So I hope people will check that out when it comes.
Fantastic. And don't forget, everybody, if you're watching this on the day that it drops, this week is Death Ratioed as well, which is what we had Mark on to talk about the last time. How can likes and dislikes on social media kill you? Well, you're going to have to read Death Ratio to find out. So definitely check that out, coming from AWA this week. Definitely get down to your local comic shop and check it out. So again, Mark, remind everybody where they can follow your work online.
I am on social media, most of the handles, most of the platforms like Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. My handle is Manruss, Manruss. So check me out there.
Yeah, and I'll put links to the social media in the show notes, everybody. So if you're having trouble finding Mark, you can go there. And also be sure to click that link, check out the Kickstarter when it goes live. And again, Mark, it's a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
It's always fun, Jace. Thank you.
And to you listeners, we want to express our gratitude as well for hanging in and listening as always. And we'll talk to you next time.